I was born in a place called Eastland, Texas, about 100 miles west of Fort Worth, and reared in a little town 10 miles about away from that called Cisco. So I was reared there, and took my education at Texas A&M University, at college at that time, and petroleum and mechanical engineering. And my father was in the oil business. He was a small independent oil producer. And when I graduated, I would graduate in 4 years with petroleum engineering degree. But at that time, World War II was whooping itself up in Europe, you know, and things were in an emergency kind of state all around. And I thought many times, you know, just what in the world to do. And as it turned out, I went ahead and decided to become 21. I would graduate when I was 20. Well, you cannot at that time, and when you're 20, get a job at that time. No one would take you because you had to commit yourself to reassignment and everything else for the way things were economically. So I said, well, I'll go ahead and get my degree in petroleum engineering and mechanical engineering, which I shot to do. Well, so I started out the year and suddenly at 41, that was in 41, December hit, and December the 7th, as you know, December the 1st is my birthday, so I became 21, and I was given the rank of a second lieutenant in the United States Army. I was in anti-aircraft in school in ROTC. Well, from then on, you know, I tried to postpone things, and they postponed me once, but in April they called and said, now in 3 weeks you have to be here in operation. So boy, late April I was called, and I spent a couple of weeks down in training new troops, and troops were coming in. They didn't know which end were up, how to walk, or which way to everything else, you know. So we went through all of that, and I was shipped out to the West Coast as a casual officer, and all of the rest of the people were shipped out there, most of them, and they're casual farm. That meant they were not organized in companies or batteries or whatever, and anti-aircraft is a battery, and so forth. So we, make a long story short, I was shipped out to Oahu, and I was on a ship there, and I was graduating while I was in there, and got my announcement that I'd been received my degrees and everything, because I'd gotten all my paperwork in before I left and things like that. But when I hit Oahu, you could hardly imagine the way people felt out there. They were just so jumpy like that, because the attack on Pearl Harbor was just devastating. And evidently we had the kind of intelligence that the Japanese were planning to re-attack Oahu, where Pearl Harbor is located. And that was the reason they were sending us all over there. Well, we were so poorly trained. I was the lowest ranking second lieutenant. The captain, I finally got in a battery. We didn't know what we were doing. The guns that we were using were 1875s, you know, anti-aircraft guns. The height finder was 1921, and the computer, which was not a computer, it was just a little kind of grinding gearbox. They tried to project things, was 1928. So we didn't have anything that way. We went out, and they sent us to the beach to shoot at the planes. targets. You know, we had a target. Well, the battery commander, he had graduated in the 20s from the ROTC. He hadn't done a thing. The first lieutenant, who was the only educated person militarily speaking that speak of, and he was nuts. He was off the track. He was mentally ill. Well, anyway, and then I was in the second lieutenant, but I knew more than all the rest of them put together because of the training that we had, you know, being in a military school. We were sent down to fire at there. Well, we fired, but we almost shot the plane down because that screwy first lieutenant had put all the corrections in backwards. So we went to, we were right in the center of the island. And we were there, it was a perfect place for an anti-aircraft coming in, hitting Fort Shafter, hitting down Pearl Harbor again, everything else. But we got the Japanese fleet was materializing now and was coming in, and we kept, and you hearing about how our dive bombers were trying to do this and that thing, and they coming in, and people were just scared to death in Oahu. I was afraid to go outside at night even. They'd say people would be shooting at you. But we got a news report, supposedly, that the Japanese had broken through the perimeter defenses at Midway and were headed toward Oahu. The island just went berserk. They just shook all over. Anybody were like that. And we got down a wire to us, or a telephone type of thing, saying, do not fire at anything unless directly attacked. That's what they thought of us. Well, so as you know, the Japanese forces were actually, that was bad news, but they were stopped at Midway by there and kept from coming in. They had to turn around and go back. Well, fast forward to toward the end of the war, I was in the anti-aircraft. We went to one task force backing up the Marshall and Gilbert's things. We were now assigned to Marines because they didn't have any aircraft with them. They wanted us also because with anti-aircraft has high muzzle velocity, whereas the ordinary has is mortars, and then you have howitzers, and even their big howitzers is just like that. And they want us to shoot directly into the pillboxes. So we did all that, and attached to Marines on that. And the slaughter was just absolutely, just unbelievable. After the Marines had sort of cleaned the island up, and at least they pronounced it secure, I was in the headquarters battery by that time. I'd been promoted to a major spot when I major. And our guns were all located ready there, and we fired at airplanes when they came over. Did real well knocking them down, but and we would shoot, they'd bring in our guns and they would shoot directly into the pillboxes with a high velocity. Now we were 100 yards back behind the infantry part of the infantry, that is the foot soldier, and like that, which that 100 yards, like goodness for physically for that, you know. But make a long story short on that, I think 7,000 Americans, and I don't know how many Japanese. They had 31,000 people on the island when they attacked, and some of them were taken as prisoners, but most of them didn't want to be prisoners, so they'd commit just impossible missions. And we'd shoot them down when they'd come in to as best possible. So we had this bulldozer would just dig out the ground and put the Japanese in and then cover it all up. But they did take for the Americans, which we were all Americans at that time, they put what was left of you. They would put tags, dog tags, in the little cross or a Jewish symbol for the. And I remember this group that I took out one time. They had 2.5-ton trucks. They'd back up. They'd go through and pick up stuff, put them, bodies in various parts of decay, put it back in there, and they'd then take rakes and put them in there and try to put the get the pods. Then there's shovels and everything, and you had put in there, and just a stinking mess of bodies decaying in all sorts of forms, you know. And you'd have to take that and try to figure out how to bury them and everything. Going through that kind of process of the dying of people, you know, didn't seem, you did your duty and all that sort of stuff. Well, even though you were in that kind of a situation, and I remember we had a place with 500-pound bombs over here, and stored, and we'd finally, the Marines had gotten up enough we could dig holes and lift something out of other than foxholes, you know, and they had the little pyramidal tents. And my hearing's aid, I think, been because we were in foxholes, and the Marines came in behind us and were shooting their howitzers over our head like that, trying to get into it. But anyway, what it's trying to say, just the tension of everything, of killing and sort of stuff, and we were really good at even aircraft, you know, aircraft. But this time we had radars, we had 120 millimeter muzzle-loading guns, and 120 millimeter guns firing around 2,800 feet per second, most, you know, that kind of thing. Just fantastic artillery. And toward the end of the wars, the Japanese, again, we had their intelligence, and we'd get our intelligence. So many Bettys, squadrons of Bettys would be taking off from such and such a place in Japan, coming down. The submarines off the coast of Japan would pick them up in their radar, and the destroyers 100 miles out would pick them up. And then on their way down to Iwo Jima, though they'd say the Bettys are headed toward Iwo Jima, we track them. And then about 250,000 yards, or miles, excuse me, from Iwo Jima, the signal corps would pick it up. Then within 100,000 yards, our radars would pick it up, and we'd start firing at them when they were about 60 to 1,000 away, and coming in anyway. They came in around 30,000 feet. So that was the kind of thing. I'm giving you that kind of detail just as kind of the context of there. I went to work, came back, and went to work as a petroleum engineer, training and everything, and went through working in the field as a field engineer and so forth, and then got promoted and came into Fort Worth, which was a district headquarters and everything. While I was there, I got married, and then to my wife Ann, and she came back, and that was my first place of there. Well, anyway. Something was wrong, you know. I didn't have a so-called foxhole experience, but that as I look back on, it was just like something grabbed hold of my inner zeitgeist, or my whole ability to put together being a human being, and yanked it out, you know. Well, what do you do? I didn't know what to do, so I decided that, well, I couldn't get any answers from daily life, so I joined the ministry. So I decided to go that route, and I went to Ann and told her that, and that's the closest she ever came to divorcing me. You know, and everybody said, "Oh, it's nice. Oh, isn't that great? You're wonderful. Joined the ministry. What in the hell is he doing that for?" Behind your back. And people didn't have that, and they're kind of second-class citizens. Well, I went through that. I had my first parish here in Dallas, and I was there for about 4 years, I guess. And while we were there, after the first year, we were in a brand new area. They brought us in, we built new buildings, and the people were coming in, moving into Dallas by the droves, you know, new suburban situation. And after the first year, there was a Methodist minister. He was a dive bomber, a Navy dive bomber, and here I was, anti-aircraft Army guy. We were in that, and we both had gone into the ministry separately without knowing that. But anyway, he was in the Methodist, and I was in the Presbyterian right across the street. And after that first year, we talked. He was a real buddy, and my God. The people we were talking with were fantastic, but I kept saying, I couldn't get them to understand the gospel. And he said, I couldn't get my group to understand the gospel either. And we both finally decided, we didn't know what, we couldn't understand the gospel either, what the gospel was. So we went out to, there were 3 professors at Perkins School of Theology at SMU here. And one of them was Joe Matthews, the other one was Edward Hobbs, the other one was Bob, what's his last name? Well, anyway, they were different departments. Joe was in ethics, and Hobbs was New Testament, and the other guy was practical. Bob was in the practical part. And they had a art farm table. We asked if we could come out to the art farm table, and they said, oh, sure. And they come to that table, and they'd be sitting around the table, and the 3 professors would be around there, and they looked just like the students in those days. You know? They were not aged people. And we'd had plenty of things like Guernica and other things like that, music one time, or literature, or poetry, or something, you know, or a book. And that worked real well. And we got all excited, and Joe was very much interested in us, and Hobbs, the New Testament guy, brought a book, Bultmann, first chapter of Bultmann's out for us, and we got then Bultmann, and I came home and said, look, he said, you know, hey, God sort of came out of the clouds, you know, down in your personal everyday life, you know, up against this, everything else rolling around. And so I went in and, look, that's God, that's God, that's God. I think she thought I'd gone nuts. And so anyway, so we got interested in that, and so we asked if we could attend their courses. And so we sat in many of Joe's classes and Hobbes' classes, and then later on Schubert Ogden, who was a process theologian at that time. But Joe came out and visited with us. We'd go on retreats, this pastor and I would have this Methodist pastor and myself and Joe, and then maybe another 1 or 2 pastors. And we'd go by, you know, and Joe's wife would, Lynn would make some sandwiches for us and pack lunch for us. We'd go over an overnight retreat and take up some issue or some farm, or some art farm or something like that. And that continued for years, even when we moved to Austin. Well, Joe got called to the Christian Faith and Life community in 58, I guess. He went there as dean. And I won't go into all of that because that's it's just taking too long for me this long. So what I want to say now. But he went down there as dean, and he was a spark that lighted. Jack Lewis, who's the head of the thing, built the structures, and he also put us in touch with the lay movement. And another couple and I, and my wife and I, 2 of us, went rented a Volvo and spent a whole summer going to different places in worship, study, life together areas and mission, which were had been, which later on became the bug model, as you know.
Right.
And I've written all that down. I'll give it all to you. You can see all that if you want for factual information. But I really like to move on, if I may. Anyway, I moved down there, and it was a fantastic happening. The wives began to study at night with us and everything like that. They began to teach courses and things like that, and they became a part of the total group. We got kicked out of there because we were too strong for kicked out. We had to resign. They were after Matthews, of course. He was the lightning rod, and he was the major guy there. He was our spirit leader for years, and he and Joe Pierce and I, when they said. Joe said, well, he'd resign. Joe and I jumped up and said we'd resign. That was the three Joes. We all said we'd resign together. Well, later on, three more decided to resign and come. And so in the meantime, we began searching. We found out through, we'd been holding classes around the country and in Canada and so forth, you know. We had people all over interested. And Joe had been lecturing in universities, and some of us had been lecturing now after him in universities and churches and groups around the place, you know, the United States. And so Bishop Jim came in the picture and helping us out. Anyway, we moved to the Ecumenical Institute in Chicago, and Walter Liebrecht, who was part of the early forming of that institute, which out of the World Council of Churches, which incidentally the institute in the World Council of Churches in Switzerland is at Basel. It's a research arm there for them, and that's what they were set up there. Well, this was time of Vatican II, and Liebrecht, who's a Lutheran pastor, wanted to go back and be their Lutheran representative on Vatican II, so it was just opened up for us there. Well, you had Matthews and the rest of us there. And see, the reason I point out Matthews, he was one who had the credentials. He had been to Yale, he had graduated, and all this sort of stuff. You know, he had Bishop Jim on his side and so forth. Well, they decided, they said, invite him to become the Ecumenical Institute as dean, head of the Ecumenical Institute, which is the dean. And we said, well, what about the rest of us? They said, well, we can't handle you. And we said, well, why don't you just pay us $1 a day? I mean, a year. Pay us $1 a year. Well, they scratched their head, and that was under the guidance of the Church Federation of Greater Chicago. They decided, well, we'll do that. And so our wives went out to work and everything else, and so we were able to live and get along. And we lived in this house in Evanston, and that's a whole other story. I'm going back, and I'm too detailed. We were there, and then, well, the block busting was going on, and down in the lower part of Evanston and things like that. And so we got to. They got antsy about us, and we were not ideal people. You know, we drove up there. How can you imagine? You had cars coming with Texas license plate, parking on the all around, everything like that. Living in there, moving in that big old house, and they only had 2 families were allowed to live in there. So we had one guy that had rented the 3rd floor, and he had a lease, so we couldn't get rid of him, and so we had only had one. Well, we put the male children in the carriage house and the apartments out there, and Matthews and 3 other families down below, and then the rest of us with and the wives and the female children lived in the big house. So, but anyway, our dogs dug up the people's collar bands, whereas a group of nuns lived next door to us, and they had they took cookies and cakes to everybody else, so they were in good standing with everybody. You know, who would want to kick them out? So we were that, and so we were part of living group, and they didn't like what we were saying, I don't think, in the first instance. So meantime, then blockbusting began in the West Side. Chicago was sort of a mecca at that time for the black people in the South. They moved to Chicago, got a good job, you're in the North, you're free of the what you are and all this clutches of the South and so forth. They went up there and they lived in the southern part of Chicago. Well, that got crowded, so they moved into Chicago and moved into the West Side. Well, you have black people coming into your community, and this was a fine Jewish community in the West Side at that time. Well, what do? They get scared, so they move out. And they moved out. Black people coming in, the economics is going down, they're in the drugs and all sorts of stuff, you know, and this sort of thing. Well, there were two seminaries, one Bethany and one Northern Baptist, that fled. But the Bethany also had a hospital. Into their good graces, that hospital stayed and ministered to the community. We moved into Bethany there, and that was when the stuff really began to happen. We nailed the Congolese cross up on the wall and became there. And that's when we moved to Evanston in '62, and then in '63 moved to Chicago, West Side, and lived in there. And it was just fantastic happening during that time. And you heard Joanne. In the meantime, our children there. We sent Bill to Latin America, Joanne to India, John to Malaysia and Singapore. Get out of this American culture into another culture and so forth. Well, so but I can't describe what all went in. That's a whole new kind of thing, and it's because there's so many of us went through West Side, and we've all got that in our history. You're not telling people very much, and everybody contributed to what went on there. But we kept going overseas. Not only that, I think in '64, Gene Marshall and I and with our spouse went on a summer turn through every country in Latin America, visiting it. Charles Hahn, I think it was '65, and Joe Pierce went to the Middle East, and then Fred Buss, something in '66, went to Mid East also. I went to India in those early days, and there going through that, just trying to get our way around. And Bishop Matthews, of course, had a direct influence. His wife Eunice, her father was really the saint of the Methodist Church, so to speak, his role he played in India, according to them, you know. And we held the first, all the time our curriculum was constantly developing as we were there. We were spreading all over the United States, spreading into culture, and began to get calls to go to other places like India and so forth like that. And so India, we decided to hold, and the East Asia, we decided to go and we went on trips there to those countries, holding courses and things like that in these various countries and other cultures, you know. And I remember not only India, but hold in Australia and Malaysia and other places like that, you know, and Indonesia and then we began to go to Japan and Korea, anyway, all over that area, and Hong Kong, and holding courses and setting things up. And, so we held the first institute of ITI, International Training Institute, yeah, and we held them in Singapore, and that was I think in '68 maybe. We really became a third order, as you know, we announced there. This was when we had that set up in Austin, but in Evanston, To move to Evanston, we had to solidify the order for economics. In other words, we had to all contribute our salaries to the work of the Institute and then pay the stipend back out of that. That helped to solidify it. So when we went to became the order, we were ordered and began to order completely in our, which we've been doing for quite a number of years, in the worship and the curriculum of teaching, the life together, and the mission. And that bug model, as we called it, was the area of thrust. And so we tried to push down from the gospel side the religious dimension of that, which had R-S1, and then the CS1, the religious and the cultural curriculum. We had to push to the bottom everything the way we understood the pinning of what held religious community and cultural community together, as best we knew how at that time. But not only did we do that, we came together as a group of people totally committed to do that, and that was our job, to bring that gospel understanding into the local situation, or kind there, wherever we lived and whatever we were doing. And we had to produce in Fifth City. We had to nail down what it meant to grow from the grassroots level up. And so the actual methodology for working with local people grew out of doing what we did in Fifth City. And so wherever we went and setting up our work, that was what we were saying we were doing, that we wanted to change people's life from the grassroots level up. Now, and that's what came out of that. That possibility took place in that cauldron of the 60s there, from 60, let's just say the 60s. Actually, we stayed there till 70. And so that cauldron was what was taking place. And what held to that was we were developing those dimensions of life, and into the 70s it spread out. The ITI was now held not only in Singapore, but began in India and began to hold ITIs in other countries around the and I held a second ITI in India there too, along with many of the staff, as you know, and the rest of their time. And then we held the advanced course in, I was in 69, the advanced course in 70 there, and this kind of thing, 71 I think. Matthews lived, what did he die, 76 I think.
77.
77, yeah. He stayed with us that time, and he was the religious leader, but he knew he was going to die sooner or later, of course, and he was developing a structure to hold that in, and the whole panchayat and the rule of their living, having 2,000 or 3,000 people that included all cultures with all religions and everything together around the globe was the result of that. And that was what was a fantastic happening. Now, why did that not, what's going on there? Well, now this is highly subjective. This is my feeling of that.
Yeah.
That we never were able to go beyond the spirit life from what we were able to do with those first few years. And that's not true, of course. But when I say we, I always put it I, but I think that. So I wanted to go into meditation, but we were not equipped to go into meditation. And we began to work on that. And so Matthews developed this thing of the four things, you know, the land of...
the other world.
Yeah, the other world, the river of consciousness, the mountain of care, and the sea of tranquility, which was right on. But we had no way of operating beyond that level. And there. In other words, we were able to move up to a point in our spirit journey and had no concrete way of moving beyond that. Now, we tried in the 60s, in the 80s, of doing that, continuing that, but we did not. Matthews was dead, and the rest of us were not equipped to assume at his place at that time. So this was very difficult. It was the articulation of the gospel relevant to the culture and the religious dimension of life at that time. I think we were not able to continue on a unified contemplative life. We were not able to carry the spirit journey on in a unified manner. And say we tried in the 70s, 80s to do this, but the New Age had come into being, and all of this and everything. We were trying to bring the New Age in, but we didn't have the tools of continuing in contemplative life. And that's been the key. I first took a course in meditation in New York in 79. Well, I was hooked. I didn't know I was hooked, but I continued that in the 80s. Zen work and Vipassana work and inside meditation of various lengths. Weekend, 1 week, 2 weeks, one time, or 3 weeks, I think. I'd attended all this kind of work and everything. So I got hooked that way. But something, I was not able to continue on the meditative journey in that respect. Although I touched it, I felt like the depths of everything. In other words, you had the coming of all of the different people especially during the New Age. All the insights were being accepted by people, but how to ground that? In the contemplative life, I don't think yet had been developed enough for that. A key for me was Ken Wilber. And Ken Wilber's work, as you know, he was in college doing his work, and his first book came out. Then he came out with another thing, and he was right on the line because he was showing how the contemplative work was continuing and had been continuing throughout the ages, both in Christianity and other type of work. So you had contemplative prayer on one hand, and which everything else from the cloud of unknowing to other things, which people are trying to like that, to meditation here. Both of them on how you move into, continue in the spirit journey. And I became 65 and retired, so to speak, from that type of work. But 70s, Ann was also retiring, so we decided that we would leave Chicago and go somewhere. We didn't know where to go, so we said, there's so many places we've been around the world together, Ann and I, that we loved and lived in and everything, and our children had lived in other countries too. So anyway, to make we couldn't decide, so we decided we'd come to Dallas. The reason for that is I have a sister who lives here, and my wife is from Texarkana, so she had her family who were all still alive at that time. That is, her parents were still alive, and our brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and so forth. And be close to family. So we said we'll spend 2 years in Dallas and decide what to do. And 2 years just up, and we said it's time to move. So we moved 5 houses down the street. That's just a little sad. But during that time, the 90s, I was sort of like a loose cannon. And that's like time I went into working with the Kabbalah and anything else. It seemed, how do I get hold of something that grounds me today? So I'm grounded both in culture and the physics and everything. So John, in the meantime, was in New York, living at that time. He, Master Charles M.C. Cannon, who is the head of Synchronicity, was speaking there, and he was acquainting people with his work and his tapes and things like that, which incidentally I'll give you a copy of that present stuff. And he, well, I was fine, but I got hooked on what was called the recognition course. And the recognition course, so I decided, well, I'll just try this outfit out. I tried everything else out, so to speak. So I began to take that recognition course, and then they just invited me to come to they had meetings, that time 4 of them, mastery programs they call it, 4 quarters of the year. It's in south of Charlottesville, Virginia, about 40 miles. And in the Blue Ridge Mountain, beautiful place. And so we'd go there. And it is a high-speed meditation place. He developed what's called, he calls it high-tech meditation. And meditation is primarily moving down the level, both developing the right and the left hemispheres, and moving the level down from beta, which is about, I think, 18 to 20 hertz, down to alpha, which is just below that. And alpha is what many people, that's what's, maybe you've heard of dedication, a guy named Benton, the medical doctor, came out with meditation. Anyway, and that he made it popular there. But now meditation goes beyond that. You can move down into the theta level and then into the delta level, which is from 0 to about 4 or 5. And theta is from 6 and 7 and maybe 8, and your alpha goes down in there. But you go through these various levels, and that's where your meditation, and you can see this on brain waves and so forth, where people are in that stage of meditation. And this is where Wilbur was so helpful. He went through and he put that down in black and white. In the meantime, you had other people, primarily Don Beck, who talks about the memes, you know, different memes that people come out. You're come out, you're a tribal men, you know, and then you're a group men, and then on up, and now men, which is a economic men. Then you have cultural, another kind of, it's the green men, which is really releasing people to see other people's viewpoints. It means to see the world. That's why, and the hippies came out of this. And Wilbur puts it this way: you're developing people's lives, and they come through various memes like that, and they're now moving here. But now the spirit and both those memes go on, and then into not only you move into the green, but then you move into the turquoise, and then you move beyond the light, and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter on down there. And then Maslow and others have developed the same kind of thing. Other people have developed how people grow. You see, how they grow in spirit, how they grow in the various elements, how they grow spiritually, how they grow in cognitive, how do they grow in sensitivity, how do they grow in recognition of others, how do they grow in emotions, and all of these are ways in which people grow. And so this is just a fantastic happening there, what they show, where they are. And Wilbur's thing was, people can have a spirit dimension because the spirit dimension starts with birth, so to speak, on down all the way up. That ribbon. The cognitive comes in later on and up and stops. And the spirit dimension comes at a certain point when you move out of, well, the basic thing, body, mind, soul, and spirit. That's the thing that's equivalent to all first graders, so to speak, you know, when they're talking about like that. The dimension we use has synchronicity, and it's parallel, if not the same thing as others, is parallel to all your contemplative and meditative traditions. You have the dense dimension. The dense is body, mind, and mind is brain waves and all of that, body, biology, and all of that sort of stuff. And then emotions, and you have your emotions, and it runs a whole gamma of things like that. These things make up the dense dimension, and that dense dimension is held by the frequency rate of your spirits, of your meditation or your contemplative life moves. And so that's what that is. And it moves, once you move beyond the dense dimension, you move into what's called the subtle dimension. The subtle dimension gets more subtle and more subtle and more subtle in its frequency that moves on. And it's that dimension that you gauge a person's spirit growth by. In other words, here I am, go back now to the present society now is living out of the tribal dimension, which is has an economic overtone, which we tie into us as the American dream, getting more, building up lives, cars, houses, so forth, eating fine places like this and so forth. And so you have that. And but even so, I've had an experience when something blew open for me. Ha ha! I had a mountaintop experience, so to speak. But where do I go? I fall back into the culture in which I'm in, which says, brother, you haven't made it yet. You got to work harder. You got to study harder. You got to be greater. You got to move. You got to act. You have to come something with your life. You know, you got to do this type of thing. You know, all the things. You got to toe the line, whatever. You know, that type of stuff. Well, all these things go on. You know, and whatever mem you're in like that, and that's where. Wilbur came out in the 90s with what they call boomeritis. He wrote about how people were developing, culture developing up to that point, but culture then just held on to the tribal dimension of with its economic overtones of more the dollar is the bottom line type of thing, you know, on up. And it won't wash. Here you got some great evangelist, you know, like a Billy, think of some great evangelist, you know, whatever like that, you know. Well, I don't fault him. He's as far gone as he's gone. But he's going back and interpreting that out of these tribal archetypes. Well, what people here? They all just take it into their tribalism. And you have tea parties, you know, have far-right Republicans, all that kind of stuff, you know, coming out, just fundamentalism in new forms or whatever this. And so during the 80s, after I moved in here and working with that, I got to a point in my moving from if you want to use your chakras, up through your chakras, up through your throat chakra to your that chakra. That moves into the deep subtle dimension, and you move into that dimension. I had begun to move into that dimension, and they began to call me a Master Joe at there because I had moved to that dimension. And I'm just Master Joe within that little part. No one else knows what Master Joe means. If they ask me, I say, well, I'm a master meditator. Well, they don't know what meditation means usually, you know. So anyway, so that's good. But anyway, that kind of thing goes on. During the Master Charles turned 60, he said, and I won't give you his whole history, I'll try to boil it down. He was moving from what I would put in my language, from giving people milk to begin to give them meat. And he had these signals from his coming out of his own meditation or his own spirit dimension, articulation. And he began now to speak more directly to the dimension you're talking about, how people can be in the subtle realm and how to live in that dimension of that. Now, if you take the meditation steps, you can move in that, stay in that third eye dimension there for years, and it depends on years and years and years, or you can move rapidly. Well, that's because of this high-tech meditation, I was able to move, I think, in what's called the cervical dimension of meditation, which is you become absent to yourself with form. In other words, if you want to put brain waves, you have brain waves have moved down to into the delta level, and you go out. In other words, you lose consciousness, deep sleep, if you want to put it that way, in the brainwave terminology. You're in deep sleep, but you're still awake. And so you're awake and you're meditating, and you go out. You notice that you go out, but you also notice you have meditation. I mean, things come in your life and in and out and everything. So you have that. Well, you keep on meditating, and you hit nirvikapala. And nirvikapala is absence without form. In other words, you go into absence, and you're out of it. And people talk, everything else, you can be listening to lectures or whatever else, and you're gone. You have no way of knowing what's happening where. And then suddenly you come out, and you know you've been gone, and that's taken place. And that's what your absence without form kind of thing. And that's what's called the sahaja state. And that sahaja state is a state in which you live in absence without form. You have the something out here, and then you have the Big Bang, and then you have whatever we call the universe here. You have things about the things of life and everything like that. Life itself going on. We live in life, but what's beyond life? Well, I don't know. When you go down, what do you get? Quantum, you go down to quantum quarks, what do you get in quarks? Well, I don't know down there. Well, that's what I think the ancients meant by you just keep going down the abyss. What's under that? And you know, they all say about the ruler wanted to know what held the earth up, what was under the four parts. They said, well, a turtle here, and a turtle there, a turtle here, and a turtle there. They said, well, what's they resting on? And the fellow said, it's turtles all the way down. So, well, and then there's another one is, the abyss of nothingness. There's nothingness out there. Well, nothingness, emptiness, you have no, it's irrational. There's nothing, who can think about anything? It's inscrutable, And the Buddhists have a thing, it's beyond. Well, beyond what? Oh, beyond. Well, what's it? Beyond the beyond the beyond, that kind of stuff. Well, it's that kind of thing, When you talk about the ultimate reality, and you cannot know ultimate reality. The Old Testament was good about that. You see God, you die, boom, you're out of it, like that. Now, what you do then, you come in, and the first thing, what do you hit? Is life. Life, as you see, life itself. And life is made up of polarities. And I like Carl Jung, the great 20th century theologian, he said, there's no polarity without, there's no reality without polarity. That's his little couplet. I love that. And so it's a model as of relative reality. You have relative reality, and reality is made up of these opposites. And that's the only thing is that is those two realities held together, I'll come back to it, relative reality. You have individual, you have inner and outer. You have inner being and becoming. You have life affirmative and life negative. You have formlessness and form. You have stillness, emptiness, nothingness. And you have activity, fullness, and everything, that kind of thing like that. You have inner and outer, male and female, Father, God, and Goddess, spirit and manifestation, kindness and hatred, beyond hope and hope, and above and below, and comprehensive and individualistic, and a great saint and an asshole. You know, either one of those, however you know, all that's held by life. You know, people, you see them around, and you see various. You can see the street names like we were talking about, and everything else. You know, all of that. You see, that's just life. Well, ultimate reality is the only thing we know, and we only know it as relative reality, because where else can you go? You're up against the inscrutable. If you put it this way, you're up against the inscrutable. What is there? Well, there's nothing but ultimate. There's nothing but relative reality. But there's that relative reality has a peak of being, a realm of formlessness, and emptiness and nothingness. And the nothingness is the next thing to the abyss. Is where being is, you know. And so that's where life is, the totality of life is. Now I'll come back to that in a moment. But so that kind of thing is what's you're able to participate in. And so what you're doing in the spirit life is the growth in the ability to understand the closeness of you are to from that relative reality becoming less becoming and more being. You're coming from relative reality to ultimate reality. And whereas you get some of us that have great big hunks of bodies and everything, you get relative reality, subtle bodies at little, I don't know, quantum modes, whatever you want to be. I don't know. It's beyond what we can articulate, you know, so you don't want to talk about that, you get in trouble. So that's the kind of thing that we have. Now, so that's when you meditate to get more and more formless, far more formless. And the nirvana and the sahaja state is you stay in the formless state, but it's also the form, and you're all constantly coming in the form. And when you talk about stillness, and you hear people going to a great cathedral, how it's quiet and still. Well, that's a good point. And that's what meditation, you go from stillness, more stillness, emptiness, and into formlessness. And then you begin to oscillate into that. And they talk about the great circle of one. I like it. This is a model, so it's not an eternal truth, but a model. You go from nirvana, the great formless God, to the form God, to the formless God, to the form God, back and forth. In other words, that is, and sometimes they call it the pleia. It's that spirit or consciousness itself, if you want to put it that way, goes wherever it wants. And it's all over the place. In other words, it can go into the depths of your spirit, can go up to the height of your experience, to the height of form, or to the lowest of formness, and be who it is. Well, that's so you don't have to worry. That's who you are. Life is good, you know. I have another thing I want to read you. I'll read you a poem. The object tonight is love, and tomorrow night as well. As a matter of fact, I know of no better topic for us to discuss until we die. Now, that's Hyphus. Hyphus out of the Persian contemplative tradition. But you could get the same thing out of, any of the contemplative mystics too. And like who was it? It says, the one that you're looking for is the one that's looking, you know. And Wilbur, he talks about that, the I am. And that's the way, who am I? And I'll come back to that in a moment with you there. So that's where I think it is today. It is a welding of that. Back in the beginning of 2000, when you moved out of the Jewish tradition into the Christian tradition, you had these other traditions. You had the Greek tradition, you had the Mediterranean tradition, which is Egyptian, and all of this. And all of that is just a hodgepodge of things going on like it is today, only it's much slower then, you know. Whereas I don't want to come back to the speed again, only it's much slower, you say, like that. And and here you had the Gnostic tradition. Well, life isn't dumb. Life buried those. I'm speaking rationally now, and you can't speak rationally, but let me put it this way. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered over here, and they showed that dialogue. You had the Gospel of Thomas, and you had this. Same thing as, you know, I mentioned a while ago, who is that looking? Oh, he's the one that's looking, you know. What St. Francis said that, excuse me. Well, you discovered the Gospel of Thomas back in there. The Gnostics were pushing for that. You had the pagan, and then you had the religious, and then you attended the Torah, or you attended the whatever religion you were in, you know, and then you become baptized, aha, you know, like that. And then where do you go after that? Well, the Gnostic says you become a higher stage of life than that, and he's referring to this the spirit dimension that we're talking about now. And we shot them down at that time, and probably rightly so, as to say, because it was getting perverted with Marcionism and things like that, which was really a reduction of the of this relative reality down. They had to reduce it to one reality, and you had to stay in that reality. Like I had a guy in Chicago, in Canada. When I talked about God being the over against us in our life and like that, he came away at the end of the God lecture. He said, "I can't believe in anything and think that God would want to kill anybody or anything like that, you know, or hurt anybody." That's why he didn't say kill anybody. Well, that's why the Gnostic was speaking against that, and they called them Marcians. Well, they weren't Marcians. They were trying to say you were in the farmless, but you had the farm. Both of those there, and that kind of thing. Well, I think that's coming full flexion today. And love. You're going to find now love. And I tell you, love is everywhere. And rightly so. I think life is love. Your love. Your love. I am love. All is love. Life is divine. And it's that. And well, we don't act that way. What do we act like? Well, you're sitting over there and I'm sitting here. Well, I don't like this guy. I don't like that guy and everything else. But well, the higher we are growing in the spirit dimension is, that begins to change. And you see that they talk about the disappearance of the body, the disappearance of the mountain or whatever it is. You know, well, you're giving back the mountain. You're giving back the body and so forth and this kind of thing. And the body is, in the contemplative tradition, the body is you. In other words, I see you. I don't see someone over here with a name, just your name. I see you, and I see you asking me questions. Are you standing for certain positions or certain things like that are raising those questions for my life? And that's the way it is. And then when I move into the formless area of life, well, that disappeared. But when it comes back, you're you see. But you're your creaturehood that is spoken to me about life. I have to take that to go into the further dimension of formlessness. So I've become more whole at every stage of the step of life. It's more fulfilled in every way as that happens to you. And so that's where the thing is. Where this really began to hit me was in the, you may have heard about the Mumbai thing. Well, you know.
You were on TV.
What?
You were on TV.
Yeah, that's right. Well, what probably they didn't get to, there were 26 people over there, and there were guests besides Master Charles, and six of them were killed, or not, 6 of them were shot. 2 of them were killed outright, and 3 of them were wounded very seriously, and 1 of them was just grazed with a bullet. And I was about 16 seconds from talking with that group before the gunman ended up and stepped into the elevator just about the time that evidently the assassins or move in to start into that dining room. And anyway, I began to hear bang, bang, bang in there. Well, we'd heard bang, bang, bang earlier when they had evidently in the Jason Hotel, but we thought it was probably a wedding. Indians just go wild on a wedding, you know. And so I got up there and I went over to look down at this atrium, the hotel, but who I rode, the lady I went up with, one of our staff people there, she grabbed me and pulled me away. And then her husband came out, and then John came out, and by that time I knew that bang, bang, I'd been in enough of that during World War II, you know, bang, bang, and then boom, boom, hand grenades going off and everything else, you know, you knew something was going off downstairs. Well, we were for 45 hours, what I call the sweat box of emptiness, that room we were in there. It's just you didn't know. Even when they told us, well, this place, they think they've cleared everybody out there. And so, they cleared us out. You ready to go? Well, we can't go yet. Well, that means they're not sure about it. And then boom. They just found, who was that? Well, later on we found it was not only the enemy that was doing that, it was black cats blowing the doors down. If they couldn't get into a place, they were going to make sure there wasn't anybody in there, you know, in the terrace, so they'd blow the door down. So even those was frightening. That was part of the emptiness of the sweat box, you know. Well, going into the darshan, we had a nightly darshans there beforehand. We met over to a big, it's a big civic hall, with the town hall kind of thing, and they had rooms, and we had rented a room in this outfit that called itself the Yogi Impressions invited us over there. We had darshans, and the darshan was Master Charles would put on, speak, and we'd chant and pray, and there, and then we'd go up and get an audience with him, and then we had one of the women who was there, and in the place of the mother goddess. She was not a goddess, but served that kind of role. But anyway, after that, I said, Master Charles, I said, every one of your things was just like an explosion. I said, you'd go to that darshan and boom, over like that, and the next one built on that boom, you know. So I wrote this family of 5 over there who found a great family that was really behind the one that sponsored us going. And I said, if you ever put on one of these, say, your darshans are more potent than they look. You know, you come to a place where you're so close to ultimate reality in your thing that you're formless. You bubble over. Boom. You just bit by bit by bit you move toward that. And I'll put it like this, maybe for you. Ultimate reality. What is ultimate reality? Well, I won't go into that because I've already been into it one way with you, but
you're welcome to.
It's approached, in other words, from individual consciousness, that's relative reality, as you approach it as neither one plurality of the relative reality or the other. In other words, you're both. You're not one, you're not the other. You're both. Or you'd be a maniac if you were one, or you'd be a saint if the other. You can't be it. You're one. Hey, you're the one behind the one there. It's the relentless, continually balancing of both. You balance those two things, formless and form. And culture is set in the becoming side, in the form side. And in other words, the culture is always in the hatred side, negative side. And your job is to bring it into the positive side, and into the positive side, and the positive side. So you balance both sides, and that's the play of opposites you're in. Sometimes you're in the formless side, sometimes you're almost close to the ultimate, you know. And I want to come back. And finally, it's the empty space between, the witness consciousness, if you want to call it, that holds both. It's empty, and it holds both of those spaces in them, and one of them is in there. For its ultimate reality is sometimes called the Trinity. But you see, it's the experience of the unconditional love expressed as Kundalini, as transformational energy, as the awesome heartfelt note of the flute, of the tender drop of rain on the leaf, are the only thing left as a sound for the heart to hear, or just plop. A single soulful eerie cry, or what, a person that's given up finally, kind of thing. Dropped all his bodies, which we don't reach. We cannot reach that point. But that's why it's always almost there, but not quite. And that's the Trinity. Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, they had, we've so solidified that and sterilized it, rationalized it, we don't even understand what it means, you see. But this, you see, is the holding the negative and the positive together, but neither one of them, because you can't be both. The one, that empty space between, is the Spirit. So if you want to put that's witness consciousness, pure Spirit, if you want to put that. Holy Spirit. Now don't tell anybody I said you that, because they would shoot me down. Incidentally, you asked Dalai Lama, what is religion for you? He said, my religion is kindness.
So how would you answer that?
I say, amen. Yeah, because you see, I pull this out of our tradition. The worship service, the first part, humility. Second part, gratitude. Third part, compassion. That holds everything right there. Humility means that more and more you're giving up your attachments to life, hanging on to things in life to make life worth living. You got to make it, brother. You got to make it one way or the other. Giving all that up. The thing is, next is gratitude. Just life floods into you. Love, love, love. Everything is love. Just floods over you, takes in there. The heart of the universe is love. My master's master used to say, he would say, when God created the world, love spread over everything. It exploded everything, everything in there, which is the same thing as the Gospel of John, too, rightly understood. In the beginning was the Word, was the Word of God, was the Word was God, And love. That God, we always said God is love, but we didn't know what that meant, either. But now, in contemplative tradition, this is available for everybody at that level. What's life like today? Well, it's speeded up. Whereas I talk about being slow, things moved in there. Life moves by fractals. You know what a fractal is? Where it moves from boom, 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 like that. What used to be happened 10 years ago happens moving. We mean 60s, 70s, 80s. Now it's happening 2001, 2, and 3. That kind of thing. Life moves up like that. And you see the becoming side, the life that you're living is moving so fast, so fast, so fast. The contemplative side has to embrace the becoming side. As fast as it is, what does it embrace? Well, it embraces this speeding up stuff. And that's why it's so important. Well, you can't have any top-down thing anymore. You can't have the Matthews kind of guy coming in anymore running things. The Dalai Lama, he doesn't run anything anymore, and he never has. He's part of a tradition like that. He's a symbolic head, and all the native traditions. Trumwala wrote the spirit life. He talks about the Kundalini, and how you have Kundalini now moving down through the Aztec into Peruvian situation and so forth. Well, and you talk about 2012 moving in. Well, life already, you see, in Korea, talking about singularity taking place, Moore's law, compete everything over and over and faster and faster. Everything's half. Well, how fast can you go? I turn that around, put it up, you're going like that, spirit-wise, whereas you're going otherwise down that way, whichever way you turn it. If you hang on to the negative pole, you're going down further. If you hang on to the positive pole, you're going up, type of thing. But it's not popular. We say it's both. And that's when both of them is when you have to hold them, because that's where your ground of being is. That's what Tillich was pointing to. And when both polarities held together. But it's not that, it's because you can't hold them both together. You have to finally develop the spirit life that holds that part for you, minus one little tidbit. But you're constantly pushing it. You're constantly pushing it, kind of thing. So that's where I talk about that. And I wish people read 2012. What's in it? They either seen the movie, and the movie's terrible because it makes it all hocus pocus, makes it all well, that's somebody saw. They reduce it down to there instead of seeing the. Well, even so, it ought to be exciting. For the first time in 293,000 years, will all the polarities come together. I mean, the planets line up. Can you imagine that? The planets in the... well, it ought to be just, people ought to go see that just for the hell of it, I went to Niagara Falls, whoopee, when I was a kid, The wonders of the world, this is the wonders of the universe now, you're beginning that. Well, that's the materialistic part of it, that's the astronomy part. What does that mean spirit-wise? It's moving so fast, and it's not top-down, it's by this people, that people. What was it? 11 million people listened to Eckhart Tolle's thing, what is that, 3 million people? No, how many? 30 million people, I think he said. That's how many. Some fantastic people had Twitter calling one another now.
Right.
Now, and they're still doing it. They call someone, now you here, I'm pushing them here, get my husband out of jail, They dial into something they know he's listening to or something like that kind of thing. So all over you have pressure from the up that way. Well, that's where it's going to be coming from. We created the ancients created the Sangha, the life together. Well, that life together has got to work all for but where I see it is things are bottom up now, bottom this way. You have creative reality going on all over, and new things being developed, new things discovered, new things to understand like that. So that's the kind of thing that happens. And so that Sangha has got to be the joining of those people together. In closing, I would like to, I don't know how to talk about the contemplative life, except maybe any more differently than I have been talking with you about it, but I'm sure I can, and I'll be glad to come back to that anyway, anytime. But I would like to close this in a contemplative dimension. Please listen to this music. It's ocean waves. It's called quiescence. It is used at night for all of us that participate in this type of work for a nighttime. In other words, while we're sleeping, this subliminally communicates to us affirmations. These affirmations happen to be mine, so therefore I want to read them to you slowly so you may see them and either take them into yourself and go along with the rest of the things as well as that. But if you would mind doing that, please, that will give you a feel after
what it means where I am in my journey today, and how that may be of help to other people in their journey at whatever place they may be. So let me start with that, please. But first, let's just listen to this for a few seconds, if you don't mind. I apologize in one way for my first statement, but I tried to combine an ancient song that I used to sing secularly so I could sing this to myself and become it more fully. Oh, what a beautiful evening. Oh, what a beautiful night. I have a wondrous feeling, for everything is filled with delight. Everything is filled with delight. In this moment, I experience and celebrate with gratitude and exuberance that everything comes to pass exactly as it does. Love is source. Love is consciousness. Love is life. My true nature is love. I live love and am filled with love in the here and now of life. Life pulsates as relative oscillation. It eternally seduces itself and is forever drunk on its own nectar. I actuate my heart field focus, and I am forever grateful for the love that I am, the love that empowers me moment by moment. I experience love and only love, love in all I encounter and all that surrounds me. I always remember a quote, "Love is not a need, but an ecstasy, neither a mouth thirsting, nor an empty hand outstretched, but a heart inflamed and a soul enchanted." And then Buddha comes up with this. In the end, these things matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you love? How deeply did you learn to let go? Close your eyes if you like. When I move into stillness, emptiness, and finally nothingness, I become aware of the oscillation of the polarities. It seems that darkness is dominating the light. As I choose the positive polarity dominating the negative, I progress to wakefulness or dazzling darkness. Oh, the still point, the divine Trinity. My meditations take me into the Nirvikalpa state of absorption. But when I come out, I have a more wakeful focus. This is also a form of meditation. From the external, it looks like I am dozing, but instead it is a sahaja state. It is stillness, progressing into emptiness and nothingness. It is beyond linear time into eternal time. The weight of my psychological body morphs into the subtle body's selfhood. It is my anchorage, my refuge, my ground of being. In that sahaja flow, I am dancing around the divine Trinity. Presence, absence, presence, absence, and the space in between them, the still point, the witnessing consciousness, the proximate ultimate mystery. It's the dazzling darkness, the wakefulness of the positive polarity dominance. Who am I? I am source, consciousness, God, life. The bottom line is I am blissful consciousness. I am always already in the state of love. I am always already choosing love in every situation to be blissful consciousness. And now, Hyphus again. Where is the door to God? In the sound of a barking dog? Yes. In the ring of a hammer? Yes. In a drop of rain? Yes. In the face of everybody I see? Yes. I am supreme reality. I am eternally aware and spontaneously existing as all and everything. I am happiness, peace, and bliss. I am forever witness as all that is. I love myself as I am. I am source. I am God. I am as I am. Well, finally, who am I? I am Joe 4D. Joe, dazzling delight on dazzling darkness.